In 2002, this engineer's life changed forever when demons attacked him. This is one of the most shocking stories ever told about paranormal experiences. For a man who had always lived around science, I can only imagine the sheer boldness it took for him to openly admit this. I mean, the spiritual and science worlds are like two parallel lines. Or are they? Bill presents overwhelming pieces of evidence that what happened in his home is real. But why is he convinced he was attacked by the hordes of hell? After a great career of about 15 years with NASA, Bill's life was interrupted by a bitter divorce in 2002. Without his wife by his side, Bill decides he wants a change. He had worked hard for his family, but no longer had any. All that was left was to pull himself out of this dark place and do something else with his life. His plans took him back to his hometown, Arlington, Texas. As soon as he arrives, he meets his younger brother, Bob, who works at a water purification plant. Bill is determined to leave his past life beyond and decides to work with his brother in the same plant. Since his background was technical and different from what he was now doing, Bill was eager to learn on this new job and please his employers. When Bill returned to Arlington, he quickly settled into a modest apartment. Considering what he was offered, it was a good deal for his budget, so he thought nothing about this too-good-to-be-true offer. The home was enough to provide him with the comfort he needed. One of his special furniture pieces was a settee where he sat to watch TV whenever he got home from work. After a few weeks of working at his new office, the much-needed opportunity to impress his employers comes. His employer tells the team that a client needs help with one of their products. However, this client's request came on a weekend, and his colleagues are not interested in working over the weekend. Bill quickly jumped on this offer to help the client, and the appointment was set. As the day came, Bill quickly got ready to visit his client, but he received a call from his boss. This call was weird, to say the least. He was told that the client had specifically requested that Bill does not show up at her house any other time other than 5 p.m. Bill, who was already out of his home, decided to drive around the neighborhood while waiting for the right time to see the client. As soon as the clock began to count down to 5, Bill started to walk towards the house. Bill makes it to the door, but there's something quite strange about this residence. Just before he gets to the door, he hears a female's voice coming from within the apartment. The door is slightly opened, and he can swear the voice is loud. Bill cautiously walks to the door and knocks, but no one comes to respond. He can still hear the voice, so he walks into the building, where he sees one of the most bizarre sights ever. In one of the rooms, he looks through and finds the voice. However, there is more to this sight. There are a couple of people kneeling in a semicircle, and a woman is speaking in a language that is not English. The strange-looking woman is acting in a way that unnerves Bill. He believes he later heard the woman say, "In the name of Christ, I command you to leave these men." Bill freezes on the spot. He has never witnessed an exorcism and cannot wrap his mind around what he is looking at. The strange woman carrying out the exorcism looks up and points at him without saying a word. Bill's blood drains from his face, but he manages to find the strength and runs away as soon as he can. Without stopping, he rushes to his waiting van and takes off. Bill calls his supervisor to cancel further assignments with this crazy client and goes home. He spent the remaining day trying to shake off what he had just seen. However, worse than this is a feeling of unease that is beginning to settle over him. Although he is no longer in the presence of the woman and her deliverance subjects, something still doesn't feel right. In a bid to distract himself and put the horror behind him, he decides to cook a meal and watch some TV. However, whatever he walked into at 5 p.m. was about to reveal itself fearfully. Bill is home after his strange outing. As he watches TV on his favorite couch, something runs past him. It doesn't run directly in front of him, but he catches the movement with the side of his eyes. Thinking little of it, he becomes worried that there might be some rat or tiny bird in the residence, and this doesn't feel like something he wants to deal with. For the next hour, Bill searches the house for the intruder, but finds nothing. After a while, he goes to bed and falls asleep. But this will be the last time that he has any real sleep for many years. Shortly after falling asleep, he is awakened by what he thinks is something touching his feet. He quickly sits up and is reminded of the rodent. Bill looks around for it, but sees nothing. and he returns to bed. However, things were about to get worse. When he returns to sleep, he is suddenly awakened by a violent shaking of his bed. The shaking is so powerful that he thinks his home has been hit by an earthquake. He jumps off the bed and quickly runs out. However, everything is intact. Not so much of a pin is out of place. Seeing the calm around the house and the street, he goes back into the house. Just to be sure that the bed was really shaking, he tried to move the bed, but it was heavy and didn't move an inch. Bill tries to understand why all of this is happening. The time is now about 3 a.m. He quickly gets on the internet and begins to research earthquake activities in the area. However, there is nothing online about an earthquake. He finds out that there is a military base not so far off. This makes him conclude that the airplanes from this base may have been responsible for the shaking. As he continues to surf the web, his internet goes off, so he calls the service provider. As he waits to get served, a buzzing static noise comes on with the horrifying sound of a man's voice at the other end. Weirded out, Bill disconnects the call, but the call agent calls him right back. Bill is convinced that something is happening at this point and asks the agent if he heard the buzzing sound. Thankfully, the agent did. This confirms to Bill that he has not gone crazy, at least not yet. At the end of the call, the internet connection is restored, and Bill decides to rest for the night. His mind is racing at this point. Everything appears wrong with this house, but the worst is yet to come for the night. Soon, he hears some more noise coming from under his bed, and believe it or not, Bill is convinced that a long, bony hand slowly begins to rise from the bed in his direction. This is all the former NASA engineer can take for one day. He bolts out of bed and runs to his living room. Once here, he flips on all the switches in the house and decides to stay awake for the night. In the days that follow, Bill notices plenty of birds swarming over his house area. This strange occurrence makes him reach out to the realtor who sold him the property, who is just as surprised as Bill. Things are also starting to get a lot stranger in the apartment. For instance, Bill notices the constant smell of bacon in the house. The aroma, if you like to call it that, suddenly comes up and remains for days. He also notices that certain places in the home have cold spots. Imagine walking past a routine path and suddenly you're freezing. Bill, being a rational, science-minded man, tried to explain this away. He believed there were probably some problems with the air conditioning somewhere in the house. In the following days, the terrifying activities grow worse. One day, after returning from work and sitting on his regular couch to watch TV, he suddenly sees a bottle flying at him while he is eating. Bill is lucky to escape this assault without any injuries, as the bottle smashes behind him. At this point, all the lights in the building go off at once. Bill jumps off the couch and runs into one of the rooms where he keeps a flashlight. Stumbling around in the dark house, he hurries to the closet. Fortunately, he finds his way around and flings open the closet to grab his flashlight. Almost immediately, he hears a loud sound that appears as if someone dropped a heavy object beside him. Bill jumps out of his skin as this loud thud occurs. He grabs the flashlight and scans the closet, but there's absolutely no one in there. Almost immediately, all the lights come back on. This is a mad circus, and Bill is sure he will lose his mind in this house. He thinks of going to the police, but how do you explain to the authorities that an unseen hand almost assaulted you with a bottle and turned off your entire lights? The only person that comes to mind is his younger brother Bob, so he calls him that night. He invites him over just so he can get a second opinion on the things he's going through. When Bob arrives, he tries to explain the situation without sounding spooky or desperate. He asks him to wait inside one of the closets briefly. Bob is a little concerned about his older brother's request, but obeys all the same. While here, Bob feels something touch and hit his feet and face. However, he feels he must have stumbled around and doesn't take anything to heart. After stepping out, Bill asks if he experienced anything. Although he felt something was a little out of place, he tells Bill that he is perfectly fine. I believe he did this not to further frighten the former NASA professional. Shortly afterward, Bill reaches out to Bob again. This time, he invites him and his wife Cindy over for dinner. As the three of them share a meal, Bill, who is sitting on his favorite couch, suddenly gets up and runs towards his room. This act startles the couple, and when he returns, he tells each of them to sit on his couch and just watch TV. Bob and Cindy admit, just like Bill initially did, that they caught something with the side of their eye. It was either running really fast or flying somewhere around Bill's room. At this point, Bob's memory comes rushing back to him. He remembers being in Bill's closet and experiencing those strange objects hitting him. Bob and Cindy prepare to leave. They ask Bill to stay with them for a little while until he gets another accommodation. For some strange reason, Bill doesn't go with them. He is determined to uncover whatever mystery is in the apartment. I think he also feels he would be a terrible person to sell the apartment to someone else with the strange happening in it. As the madness continues, Bill decides to seek some help. He searches online for a paranormal activity team. Thankfully, he finds one and invites them over. Once the Ghostbusters arrive, led by a man called Brian Hall, they set up their gear and quietly wait for any activities. While waiting, nothing happens. So Brian asks one of the team members to go to Bill's room and just stir things up. One of them goes to the room, jumps on the bed, and bounces around. This is where things begin to get strange. There is sudden motion in the room, and the laser indicates that something just moved in the room. This is actual footage from their time in Bill's apartment. In the second piece of footage, the team detects something that appears as a mist suddenly in the room. Their recording devices also pick up some of what they initially believe is noise. However, when they play back what they recorded, they barely make out anything from it until they enhance the volume. This is when they hear the following words in a scary male voice. "Put it back. He is coming." This is enough to convince Hall and his team there is indeed something outside the ordinary. Before they leave, they advise Bill to stay away from the house, but he refuses. His scientific mind probably wants more answers. This was not such a great idea, as he was confronted by one of the most fearful experiences ever later that night. As the team hurries off Bill's residence, he is left alone for the night. He knows he will be getting little or no sleep, but what he is not prepared for is how much terror he will endure that night. Shortly after everyone leaves, Bill retires to his room, but he hears a loud noise. The noise appears like the sound of a huge truck ramming into the building. Bill is terrified and jumps off, but the sound continues. He checks for any damage, but there is nothing of that sort anywhere. After returning to his room, he comes face to face with one of the darkest and most terrifying beasts he has ever seen. A huge 6-foot creature crawls out from a corner in his room and marches straight up to his face before grunting and disappearing. One of the reasons I believe Bill might have seen and experienced something beyond the ordinary is because of the nature of his previous job. Everyone who ever worked with Bill described him as analytic and logical. Vale had a thriving career at NASA. He worked on many projects before becoming a pilot and robotics engineer there. Bill only accepted as real anything he could touch, feel, and see. For a man whose daily job helped put people in space, accurate details meant everything to him. It is important to mention Bill's occupation so you can understand why whatever happened to him defied all logic. In the following days, this creature continues to torment Bill. On some days, it left scratches on Bill's body. After this particular ordeal later that night, I'm convinced Bill has had enough and wants nothing to do with this house. But I was wrong. Bill insists on staying, and years later, in a strange twist of events, believes he finally has the answers he was looking for. In his book, Satanic Warfare: Tactics of the Demonic, Bill explains how he was finally able to stop the devilish interruptions. He later sold the apartment, as he was sure the home was now free from unwanted spirits. In the years that followed Bill's unusual life, he realized he walked into an exorcism years ago when he visited that weird female client's house. Exorcism is an ancient practice of displacing demons and unwanted spirits from a place or people hosting them. Over the years, there have been accounts of exorcism that have shocked the world. One of these was that of Annalise Michel, whose tragic story inspired the feature movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. In the Bible, Jesus exorcised demons from people. There is an interesting account of Jesus expelling demons from a madman. I found a connection in the conversation between Jesus and these vile spirits and what happened to Bill. In this account, Jesus is about to expel the demons, and they beg him not to drive them out of the territory, but into some pigs nearby. Jesus grants them their desire, and the pigs end up rushing into a river to drown. What I find interesting about this story is the spirits' reluctance to leave their familiar territory. When Bill saw the exorcism at the client's house, the exorcist was telling the spirits to leave the bodies of the men kneeling. These spirits needed a new host, and Bill showed up at the time they were asked to leave. I believe these unseen beings followed Bill to his residence after she pointed at him. Another reason I find Bill's account quite puzzling is because of his training and background. From all accounts, he is logical, scientifically oriented, and not one to go around chasing shadows. Whatever he saw, heard, and interacted with was more than enough to convince his mind that he was experiencing something new, although evil. I also considered how Bill defied the fear of being misunderstood and even called mentally unstable to share his story. People are usually too shy to share controversial or paranormal stories for fear of being canceled or attacked. However, Bill boldly shares his stories in a documentary episode titled The Visitors. When Bill finally reached out to the paranormal team, he went for a team that invested in scientific methods. Before they ever set up their equipment, they carried out an extensive search around his property. This was to be sure that whatever he felt was wrong wasn't some damaged item on the premises. Their laser beam tracking setup was enough to detect the smallest motion, and they did detect motion and pick up a voice. All these convinced them that Bill was not overreacting. Apart from this external party that experienced the strange occurrences, Bob, Bill's brother, and his wife also had their share of the strange happenings in the house when he invited them over. For what it's worth, this appears to be a story experienced by more than one person and even has some form of empirical evidence to back it up. Given all the great reasons why this story appears true, is there any reason to believe Bill might have experienced something else and not demonic attacks? When Bill returns to Arlington, he is in a bad place emotionally. He has just gone through a divorce. This may have shaped his perspective of the world and women in particular. While the reasons for this break in his marriage are not exactly known, it is not hard to imagine that Bill is hurting and under some stress. Medical research reveals that stress leads to hysteria. In extreme cases, the symptoms can manifest as trance-like states, altered speech patterns, and other forms of behavior that deviate from the norm. When Bill calls his service provider to fix his internet, his phone call is interrupted by a weird buzzing which he believes is part of the paranormal happenings in the residence. However, it is common for phone calls to record severe statics because of interferences, software issues, speaker damage, or other technical issues. In such, finding anything that ties Bill to some of the stories was difficult. For instance, when I tried researching a website, unitedparanormalinternational.ning.com, associated with him and what he currently does, it came back blank. The show where the documentary airs is also unavailable in some countries. There are little or no images of his family members or actual photos of those who were actors during this ordeal. I understand that some of these pictures may have been taken down for privacy reasons, but their absence somewhat affects the overall credibility of the story. I must, however, say I do not rule out what Bill says he saw and experienced. When you live long enough, you will arrive at the conclusion that all we see is not all there is. I salute his courage to stand by what he saw and how he maintained his convictions over the years. It is as compelling as the convictions of the children of this African country who saw bizarre things and beings on the playground one afternoon. Their full story is right here, and something you definitely want to see.